former widows of Apollo astronauts and sons of Apollo astronauts tell me their father and husband was murdered by the CIA for not cooperating with fraud in the Apollo program. They're murdering their own people. Didn't we start this country because King George was an obstacle to what? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence is the first document, not the Constitution. It says when any government, that includes our current one, becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. We have a testimony of a widow of an Apollo astronaut that he was murdered by the federal government. They're destructive of life.
The Kodega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with the Kodega and sharing one of yours. Welcome back to Codex of Curiosities. I'm Rai, your guide on this journey through the unimaginable, the insane, the crazy, everything that we label these types of experiences. Whether it be, coming face to face with Bigfoot, walking through a time glitch, or thinking we went to the moon. Now, that's what today's episode is. I've got a fantastic guest, Bart Sibrel, and Bart has created a documentary that I saw years ago called "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon." Now, that documentary, I highly suggest you watch it, and then we can continue on with our discussion. But it's, I would peg it as that we went to the moon is probably one of the greatest accomplishments man has ever made, ever done. But what happens if it's a lie? What happens if that biggest accomplishment we've ever done is nothing but a stinking lie? And I've heard the story so many times. Everybody's like, oh, there's too many people. There'd be too many people in on it. But that's the same thing with the Manhattan Project. We had so many people, in the Manhattan Project. I believe there was over 120,000. And if my memory serves me right, 8 only knew what was really being created. Now, going to the moon, the people working in Houston at Mission Control, they could not tell the difference between a demo or like a pretend launch, because they would do that. They'd practice those, between that and a real one. There was no difference from what they were seeing in their on their machines, on the numbers they're being fed. It looked identical. Of course, you would see the rocket launching, but that's it. But you see a rocket launch, that's all you do. You see the rocket launch, and then you see on TV these guys bouncing around on the moon, being live streamed in the 1960s, and talking with the president on a landline with zero delay. It's a little suspicious. How much fuel did they have? Oxygen? Did they have enough oxygen? What about the batteries for running the air conditioning units because of the heat that they were being bombarded with? Those are some amazing batteries, Again, this is 1969, okay? So there's a lot of questions, and we tackle some of those questions, and we jump into further things as well. Now, again, like I said, there's so many other questions, so many other fibs, falsified truths as well. Now, if they present to you one lie, only one, then that means you got to question the whole narrative. So if one thing was faked or one thing wasn't presented truthfully, then the rest has to be questioned as well, just as much. We can't sit there and say, okay, that was one lie. Everything else is true. You got to question everything. And when you find out that certain things are being fed to us that aren't the truth anymore, then you have to question everything. Okay, that was the biggest lie at that time. Of course, since then, we've had some doozies as well. But this could be the biggest faked hoax ever. All right, let's get to that interview with Bart. All right, so tonight on Codega's Codex of Curiosity, I am joined by Bart Sibrel. Bart, I was introduced to your work when I stumbled upon a fantastic documentary called "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon," which is a pretty peculiar documentary that, I had some questions, and it answered a lot of those questions, but even gave more as to why we're being presented with a facade, why we're presented with this fraud almost in a way. But before I jump in too far, I'm already jumping into this because this is something that I find quite exciting. Bart, why don't you give a little bit of an introduction about yourself and let everybody know where they can find you as well?
Well, I grew up believing that the moon missions were real, like everybody else, maybe more so. I had a publicity packet that my father gave me of photos from the alleged first mission to the moon that he received, and that was my most cherished possession. And we moved every couple of years, and it always had a center kind of like shrine in my bedroom to the glorious Apollo moon landing. And it wasn't until I was 14 years old where I saw a gentleman on television, one of the first guests on the new Oprah Winfrey show, say that he worked at the Apollo program at NASA, and they didn't go. They couldn't go, and they still can't go. And so, like in poker with the bad hand, they bluffed. And, whoever killed John F. Kennedy is still a tragedy, and whoever did 9/11 is still a tragedy. You can change hats on who did it and why, but it's still a tragedy. The problem is, this is a positive lie that people want to hear. They want to hear their team won the Super Bowl. They can understand that the government might lie about who killed the president. They can understand that, but they would never lie about the glorious moon landing. Somehow that's too sacred to lie about. But according to the dead man's relatives, Bobby Kennedy Jr., who has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone, he says with 100% certainty, the federal government through the CIA killed their own president. And then you have Robert McNamara, during the Vietnam War defense secretary, say that the public was against entering the Vietnam War and they needed something like Pearl Harbor to change people's opinion. So he and the CIA faked an attack by North Vietnamese on an American ship that never happened. It started a war that killed 3 million people, including 58,000 of their own soldiers, without cause. So if they're willing to kill their own president, kill their own people, I don't think they're going to have a problem faking a video image. It's just that people want to believe that Americans were first on the moon. How dare you say our team cheated to win the Super Bowl? But what if they did cheat? Do you want to know? People just don't want to know. They don't want to live in a world where they faked the moon landing, but they did. And if I can go from being one of the greatest fans of the moon missions to the greatest critic, it's simply because I'm pursuing the truth. And sometimes you just have to admit that you have cancer. And if you don't admit it, it's going to cause more problems later. So I made a film that you mentioned called "The Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon," which was financed by someone who builds rockets for NASA, who knows the moon missions are fake, gave me $1 million to produce these movies. And we found classified footage of them faking part of the photography right in front of your eyes. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh, they actually did fake the moon landing. And since then, I've come out with a book called Moon Man: The True Story of a Filmmaker on the CIA Hit List, which is in audio, Kindle, or print. I read it myself. And it has 17 interactive video links. I write a chapter and then I say, go to Sibrel.com, link one, and then watch it first so that you'll know in the next chapter as I talk about it what I'm referring to. So there are multiple clips to back up everything that I'm saying, and probably 4 out of 5 people who read the book or watch the movie reverse their opinion like I had to. They actually did fake the moon landing. And what does that mean? It means these criminals are at large running our government. And the only way to correct that lie is to tell the truth about it. Otherwise, the criminals have won. So if anyone wants to get the book, see the film for free, all the links you can see for free, they're at Sibrel.com. That's S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, REL, Sibrel.com.
Fantastic, Bart. That's an amazing introduction. Now, so your first introduction to this isn't there's something awry here, something's fishy. Was the Oprah Winfrey show where a gentleman came on, and that was what piqued your curiosity? Was there any doubts before that, or was that the point where it was like, let me look into this?
Yeah, I had no doubt at all. I just assumed they were telling the truth. I assumed they were on the moon. And that's how I looked at the pictures, not really with a critical eye. But when he asserted, this gentleman who worked for the space program for 6 years, with second highest security clearance to von Braun, who read a private memo from von Braun to the Pentagon telling them they only had a 1 in 10,000 chance of going to the moon on the first attempt. NASA has never kept a schedule their entire history of existence, except the most complicated mission of all time. They were ahead of schedule. And so that planted the seed. I went back to my bedroom wall, looked at the pictures, and sure enough, there was a part where the foreground and the background, if you look closely, you can see a line where they go from a real landscape to a fake backdrop. In fact, the smartest AI in the world, not available to the public, called Google's neural network, 10 AIs hooked up together. It has a deep fake detector program that's never been wrong. You can show it a video of Biden or Trump, and it'll tell you in 1 second whether it's real or not. Someone fed it pictures of unmanned probes from China on the moon, of the landscape on the moon. It said they're real. And then it fed them pictures from the Apollo mission. It said every single one had a fake backdrop. You see that? The pixels don't line up. The geometry, according to the smartest AI, just said the pictures that NASA claims were real are actually taken in a TV studio. So if they're taken in a TV studio and not on the moon, it means they didn't go to the moon. And they buried this story. You cannot find it anywhere in Google. You cannot find it anywhere. And they tried to cover it up. And yet, there it is. The
I
smartest
know there's a
AI.
link for it. There is a link for it
Yeah,
on your website as well. I saw that, sir.
correct. There's even a video where the presentation is being shown to Vladimir Putin, who doesn't look surprised at all. I think he's blackmailing the United States. So is China. I know someone who works in the space agency at China who says everybody there knows the moon missions were fake. They're blackmailing NASA to get space technology that Congress forbid them to receive in exchange for not blowing the whistle. That's always one of the defenses. Well, the Russians or the Chinese would have told the truth about it. Not really. It's more valuable to blackmail than to blurt it out and have the information become valueless,
You,
right?
you
I
are
could have a
100%
picture.
correct.
Yeah. So, and we have someone I know who works for the Chinese Space Agency who said that they're blackmailing NASA. The United States government is being blackmailed by China because they know the moon missions are fake, and they find that much more valuable than to just blurt it out and ruin the reputation of America. Congress forbid China to receive space technology from the United States, but they're getting it anyway. So the federal government is breaking their own laws. Of course, faking the moon landing was breaking their own laws. There was a quiz show scandal in the late 1950s where Time magazine had on its cover this contestant and with the caption that said, "The smartest man in America." Time magazine had Man on the Moon, and in both instances, they were wrong. They were forgeries. They were cheaters. The man was receiving the answers in advance. And they gave the public what they wanted. The all-American boy, the all-American man on the moon, they gave them what they wanted. So when that came out, Congress passed a law, you cannot use television to deceive people. And they broke their own law. They use television to deceive people.
They
And
they
until
did
they
that.
get caught,
Yes, there is
yeah,
a they changed that. I thought Obama changed that they can actually, use propaganda against their own
yeah,
citizens.
he rescinded that. But the
Yes,
point is that law was in effect when they faked the moon landing. So they did violate that law. Yeah. Now Obama allows the federal government to intentionally deceive their own people. It's now legal to do that.
it
You
is
know,
a joke.
90% of Americans wanted GMO labeling. I mean, the most dangerous thing we do every day is not drive our car. It's swallowing 1 to 2 pounds of food a day. And we simply wanted to know contains GMOs. 90% of Americans wanted it. Obama vetoed it. Does that sound like a democracy to you? Did
Nope.
Congress and the Senate vote to fake the moon landing? No. Does that sound like a democracy to you? The CIA fabricated the Gulf of Tonkin Vietnam War beginning, where Congress passed a law, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, to start the war based on CIA information that never happened. That was a fabrication. Does that sound like a democracy to you? Are representatives voting on true information? They're voting on deliberate lies. Time Magazine is wrong. CBS is wrong. They were wrong. There's no independent press coverage. People say, oh, there's all this proof they went to the moon. The exact opposite is true. There's virtually zero proof that they went to the moon and much more proof that they faked it. There's only two people there who are government employees, military people sworn to secrecy. And we have to trust the federal government. And that's it. It's all based on trust.
Which if there is one lie, it discredits absolutely everything. We have to question everything, and as soon as you notice one false, you have to go through absolutely everything. When you said, like the background and the actual picture don't line up, you can see that it's they're put together, it's a fabrication. And then we start getting into different light sources as well, and everything. It snowballs. And another very common thing is, well, there's too many people. Someone would have known that this was a fabrication. And I said, let's take a look at the Manhattan Project. I think there was over 100,000 people in on it, but no one knew what it was, because you only deal with this little bit. You only deal with this little bit. And we're going to pull the 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 sheet over you as well, and we're going to let you believe that it's for this, or that this is actually happening, but in fact it's not. We're just doing something else completely different.
Yeah, I mean, NASA claims 400,000 people were involved. I mean, there's not that many people at NASA. Otherwise, it'd be a city, right, the size of Chattanooga or something. They're including vendors and subcontractors and people who made the paper clips, the secretaries sold hot dogs, printed things, or whatever. As you pointed out, the Manhattan Project involved 129,500 people, and only 8 people knew that they were building an atomic bomb.
There we go.
There's 400,000 bank tellers at Bank of America. Do you really think what one of the bank teller knows about corruption in the bank is the same as what the CEO knows about the corruption in the bank? They're completely different. Do you really think the CIA is so stupid to tell the person making the glove or the door handle, hey, we're really not going to the moon? Be sure not to tell anybody. I talked to Eugene Krantz, the flight director, and he said that someone in the command center, right? All these people defending the moon missions, half of them or more, it happened before they were born. And, the other third, it happened when they were 4 years old, watching it, from their living room on television. Now, if someone in the command center, according to Eugene Krantz, they can't tell the difference between a quote practice flight and a quote real flight. It's just numbers going by on a screen. If someone in the command center who's an adult in the heart of the Apollo program cannot tell the difference between a simulated flight and a real flight, then there's no way for anybody else to know, except the two people who were there, who are all military people sworn to secrecy. So it's actually easy. The reason why it's easy to fake the moon landing is there's no independent press coverage. There are billions of people who eyewitnessed World War II and the Holocaust. There are hundreds of people who witnessed the Kennedy assassination, but there is zero people, zero reporters, zero independent press coverage of people on the moon. Don't you see? It's actually easier to get away with that than more difficult. They're trying to trick us and think the opposite of what's true.
Okay, so I do have a question. When the rocket took off and the Apollo mission actually took off, were there astronauts really in the rocket? Was that just the rocket is empty and it's just going up by itself? And then Neil Armstrong.
I think there were They would do, if I were faking it, they would do as much of it that is real as possible. For example, maybe they could land on the moon, but they couldn't get out for some technical reason. Then I would land on the moon and fake the moonwalk. Or maybe they could orbit the moon, but not land. Then I would orbit the moon. But they can't even do that. The footage we uncovered is them faking being halfway to the moon, proving they cannot leave Earth orbit. And this is one of the reasons they destroyed all the telemetry data, all the electrical diagrams, all the schematics, all the technology. Go to Sibrel.com. There's a clip that says they intentionally destroyed the Apollo technology. Never been done in the history of the world. Maybe the atomic bomb, you would destroy the technology. And yet, just 10 years later, atomic bombs were 1,000 times more powerful. So if they could go to the moon on the first attempt ahead of schedule with 1/1,000th the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. How come they can go 1,000 times farther with 1960s technology, with 1/1,000th the computing power of a cell phone, than they can today? Because today, with 57 years greater rockets and computers, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is 1,000th the distance to the moon. How can 1960s technology be 1,000 times better? It can't. When will people wake up? The truth is right there in front of their eyes. It's never happened in the history of the world that a technological milestone flying across the Atlantic, breaking the sound barrier, splitting the atom, that no one could do 50 years later. It's never happened, except the alleged moon missions. Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, right? 57 years later, I guess, is 1982. So imagine in 1982, the farthest an airplane can fly is 3 miles. And somehow in 1927, it flew 3,000 miles. But for some strange reason, in 1982, 10 years after 747s, that the farthest an airplane can fly is only 3 miles, and not a single airplane has flown across the Atlantic since 1927. Come on.
That is a great analogy. That's a very great way to put it. So people actually understand how crazy this is. It's ridiculous.
It's an absurdity, and yet what is it? Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda. He says if you tell a lie that's so big, people will not believe you are that audacious to tell such a big lie. The number one reason I hear why the moon missions must be real is because the American government would not lie about something so important. Really. They lie about everything else. You have the President of the United States swear, when I become president, I will not do this. And 6 weeks after being sworn in, he does it.
Every single one of them. Every single one of them does that.
Shouldn't the person go to jail? Shouldn't there be a law in the Constitution that says if a politician goes back on their word. That's their last day in office and they're thrown in jail for 20 years? How come this just goes on election after election after election? It's unbelievable.
It
And
extremely is. It's ridiculous. You know, I
and this
find
is the world we live in. It's so bizarre. People don't understand this. The faking of the moon landing is so much more profound than if they had actually gone. You realize that? Either they went, they planted a flag in 1969, drove cars, but they can't leave Earth orbit 57 years later, or the most powerful nation on earth embezzled $250 billion, murdered people to keep it a secret, faked mankind's greatest accomplishment because they're so juvenile and gangster like. If that's true, which it is, that's so much more profound. Do you realize that the world faked its greatest accomplishment? Doesn't that tell you something spiritually? The faking of the moon landing has a lot of spiritual overtones. Our film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, it's on the homepage of Sibrel.com, cost almost $1 million. You can see it for free. We open up with the Tower of Babel, which was to reach the heavens, and the Bible says to boast, to say we're the best. That's why they did it. It was never finished. Jesus said to start a tower and to not finish it, you're proclaiming yourself a fool to the world. Then we show the 20th century that had the radio, the TV, the largest machine ever built, the Titanic, and they put in print the ship that God himself could not sink. What happened there? Tower of Babel never finished. Titanic never made one voyage. And then Richard Nixon, who didn't even show up for the launch because he knew it was fake and was afraid, said putting a man on the moon is second in greatness only to God making the universe, when he knew they weren't there.
the
This is a
audacity of
sad,
everybody to
sad
come.
world we live in and a sad, sad country we live in. And if any president, the current or future, wants to have all political parties unite together against corruption, show them that they were duped about the moon landing 6 times, not just once, milking it over and over and over again, 6 times embezzled. And I go into my book, people who told me, former widows of Apollo astronauts and sons of Apollo astronauts tell me their father and husband was murdered by the CIA for not cooperating with fraud in the Apollo program. They're murdering their own people. Didn't we start this country because King George was an obstacle to what? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence is the first document, not the Constitution. It says when any government, any, that includes our current one, becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. We have a testimony of a widow of an Apollo astronaut that he was murdered by the federal government. They're destructive of life, right there. Liberty. You have to ask permission to go to church. And then when you get permission, you're told you can't sing. You have to ask permission to have a wedding. And when you get permission, you're told you can't have any dancing. That sounds like one group are masters and one group are slaves. How can we not see that as slavery? I don't care if 9 out of 10 people are dropping dead from a disease floating around. You can advise us. You can advise us. Maybe you shouldn't go out, but then where's that 10% going to get their tuna fish and toilet paper? And then where are the 10% of the businesses that are still alive? How are they going to make a living? Right?
Yes.
You can't have one person tell another person what they can and cannot do. That is not freedom. That is slavery. The government can have a health department and FDA and all this stuff to advise us, but they can't tell us what to do unless we're slaves and they're masters. And that's what it is. I just can't get over the tyranny is so extraordinary. And then they're embezzling our money and using it to pay the salaries of CIA agents who murder our neighbors who are exposing their crimes.
Yes.
And people don't want to believe this because believing that the moon landings are real is better. I'd rather believe that than to know that our government is a bunch of embezzling, murdering gangsters.
Yep. The mafia. They are a mafia. And it's ridiculous that people get so afraid. They get put into this fear state that they just give it all away happily too. Tell me what to do. Command me, oh my Lord, is what's happening. And
You know
it
what
is
it says in
ridiculous.
Hebrews 2? It's very profound. I must have read the book of Hebrews 40 times probably. And yet it just stood out the last time. I think it's chapter 2. It says that Satan holds all of mankind in slavery. And the tool that he uses is their fear of death. Why did people take a medicine for an illness they didn't even have? Their fear of death. I have to confess, when I was first asked to make my movie, you can watch it at Sibrel.com. A funny thing happened on the way. I turned it down for fear of death. I thought, some doesn't smell right. It looks like maybe at least there's a possibility they faked it. And if I start overturning these rocks, I could be killed for something Nixon did 30 years ago. I'm not going to risk my life for what Nixon did. No, thank you. I turned it down until I realized I'm going to die anyway. And the faking of the moon landing is more profound historically than if they'd actually gone. It's like the public having cancer and they don't know. It is worth dying for. I'm going to die anyway. And if you read my book, Moon Man, I go into how I was literally chased and drugged by the CIA when I found this footage that you pop it in, it says don't show to the public, and they're faking part of the moon mission right in front of your eyes. It's in my movie on the homepage of Sibrel.com.
Wow. That is, it reminds me of the movie, was it the movie Conspiracy Theory, with Mel Gibson, and where
Well, a
he is
better one would be Capricorn 1.
yes.
Capricorn 1 about the fake Mars landing, right?
Yes, yes. Oh, yeah, it's gotten ridiculous. And like, there's certain things that I know as a layman that we can't do. We can't, like, okay, like I'm going to go right to the moon landing here. Passing through the Van Allen radiation belt. For me, that is probably the biggest obstacle that we should have faced, is passing through the Van Allen radiation belt, because the amount of equipment we would need to protect us would be, there's no way we could lift that up into space, because radiation kills us. It's not healthy for us. And lo and behold, they passed through it without any problems, allegedly.
Well, there's a number of reasons why they couldn't go. They didn't have enough fuel to leave Earth orbit, for one. Elon Musk says in order to go to the moon with a rocket slightly taller than the Apollo rocket, it's going to take a minimum of 15 fuel trips first. So you have to do 15 fuel trips to a space station in order to have enough fuel to go to the moon and back, and a rocket that's taller than Apollo. So how did Apollo do it there and back in one rocket? It didn't have enough fuel to leave Earth orbit, which is one of the reasons they, destroyed the technology. So you couldn't find that out. And then most people don't know, about 750 miles above where the space station is a 30,000 mile thick field of radiation that you'd have to go through to reach the moon. One of the clips at Sibrel.com, part of my book Moon Man, is NASA's own engineers saying the radiation is deadly and the technology necessary to go through it to the moon and back has not been invented yet. So, how is it they went to the moon, right?
How
He
is that
says we must
possible?
solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. So it means the challenges have not been resolved, and they must be before you send people through that region of space, which means no one has been through there, which is why we have them faking being halfway to the moon in the footage we uncovered. They could not leave Earth orbit. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon. Mannequins. Really? With 1960s technology, you can play golf and drive cars on the moon. But with 50 years, 5 decades better technology, you can only have mannequins orbit the moon.
Yeah, what is going on with that?
I mean, and then there's multiple astronauts who have inadvertently or intentionally said from the space station in live feeds, we hope to someday go to the moon. We hope to someday leave Earth orbit. And there was a clip I got recently. It was one of the astronauts saying, we hope to be the first on the moon. As a NASA astronaut saying that. It's amazing. You could say one person misspoke, but 5 people misspoke, saying the exact same thing, that they've never left Earth orbit, that they've never actually gone to the moon yet. I mean,
Exactly.
it's
You know, and
amazing.
then
Yeah. And again, it's really juvenile, is what it is. The faking of the moon landing is juvenile.
of
Why
course,
not just say, Kennedy misspoke? He's not a scientist. It was an admirable visionary goal, but it's going to take more time. It's like they get their hand caught in the cookie jar and they still keep lying. How many times did Clinton say that he didn't have an affair before he admitted it? 20 times? I mean, 20 probably. And all those interviews, maybe more than 20. I did not, I did not, I did not, I did not. Okay, I did. And the faking of the moon landing just shows you how juvenile. Why not just tell the truth? We can't go. We're gonna need more time. But they were afraid, and they're juvenile now. You have generals who are juvenile, who know the moon missions are fake, who participated in it, and who are afraid. They're just like a little child. They're afraid to admit that they stole a cookie. They're afraid they'll look bad. You know,
yeah, we'll lose
I say
face.
I say look bad and go to heaven, as opposed to keep lying and go to hell. That would be my advice.
I almost believe if someone came forward, you know, maybe a government official came forward and said, no, this was faked, that there would still be a large chunk of the population who would deny that, because to deny that
But that's
denies the
already
statements.
happened. That's already happened. Part of you could say, the climax of Moon Man is we have the deathbed confession of Cyrus Eugene Akers. He was the chief of security at the United States Air Force's most secure base, their intelligence special operations base in Clovis, New Mexico. As he was dying in 2003, he said that one of the things he had to confess was that he's a murderer. And his son, who was present, brought in the military police because he said he killed a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. And they said, well, why did you kill him? He said, well, that's where they filmed the first moon landing. They brought in concrete powder for 2 weeks. They painted the walls matte black in these hangars. They brought in a lunar lander. We witnessed it. Johnson was there the first day of 3 days of filming, June 1st, 2nd, 3rd of 1968. My coworker thought it was morally wrong, and he was going to tell a reporter, and I killed him to keep it a secret. And President Johnson gave him a list of 15 VIPs who were allowed to observe, and we have the list, and we published it in the book. And Neil Armstrong is on the list, Buzz Aldrin is on the list, Von Braun, James Van Allen is on the list, and some other CIA, NASA administrators and future NASA administrators. And this is why they had the Apollo astronauts in the command center on other missions, to keep covering for each other. When something came up that was anomalous, they would say, "Oh, don't worry about it. That's a computer glitch or whatever." And so that way they could keep as few people in on the loop, because they had already faked the moon landing before. So then they put them in the command center to help run cover.
Mm. That's a smart move, actually. Quite a smart
Yeah, it
move to
is.
do that. Yeah. It's and then after seeing the video after they came back from the moon, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, and they're all sitting there being interviewed by the reporters, and they look like they just came back from a funeral or something like that. You think if this was the second greatest accomplishment ever in the history, of the world, of the universe, and they just look like nothing important just happened. It's quite a telling tale when you see that.
Yeah, I showed that for maybe 10 seconds in the film. And yet, maybe 1 out of 5 people who know the moon missions are fake said that's what convinced them. They do look like they're at the funeral of their mother for an hour. They look like they don't want to be there. It looks like exactly the mood of someone who would be lying about walking on the moon for the first time, rather than the winning Super Bowl room, locker room, with a smile that you can't wipe off their face. They even have teleprompters hidden inside the desk they're sitting at to prompt them with the answers to, like, how was it to walk on the moon, when they're the only ones who should know. So it's pretty bizarre. And that's why two of the three astronauts never gave interviews. They didn't want to lie. And maybe they weren't good at lying. I'm not sure.
And Buzz Aldrin at the in the later stages of his life, was he would let it slip about not going to the moon. That there was multiple occasions that he did that, and that was on video. We never went to the moon. I think he was telling a little girl. The little girl asked him about the moon, and he's like, "Oh, we never went." When one of them is letting it go, letting it slip, you start to wonder. Like, again, I don't know how people cannot see this. They're like, "Oh, I'm just going to ignore that has happened."
Well, they are ignoring it. I talked to a college professor who said that if one of the Apollo astronauts confessed on national TV that the moon missions are fake, he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. That they've made a religion out of it, literally. What's the pinnacle of science? Putting a man on the moon. You see, the Bible talks about this: people worshiping the works of their hands, which become false idols. The Book of Revelation says one of the names for Lucifer, the father of lies, who runs the world, according to Jesus. Right? Luke chapter 4 says that Lucifer was tempting Jesus and would give him the kingdoms of the world because they belong to Lucifer, and he can give them to anyone he wants if Jesus would worship him. This is why our world leaders are liars all the time. And one of the names in the book of Revelation for Lucifer is Apollyon, Apollo. They put lie right there on the rocket, as the Illuminati say, hidden in plain sight. And I don't know if the truth is going to come out. The truth about the Tower of Babel never being finished came out. The truth about the Titanic being a ship that God himself couldn't sink, that truth came out. So I'm hoping and prayerfully this truth will come out to humble mankind and to give hope for the United States. The evil people who run the world can actually use the disclosure of it to their own advantage, really. They could bring down America if they want a new world order. While that probably means Illuminati and Bilderberg Group and Economic Forum and all that, what it really means is a new order, a new sequence. Whoever's number one is not number one anymore. What better way to take down number one than for it to come out that the moon missions are fake, right? And then the dollar would crash. You could bring in a world currency easier, and you could even come up with a new political party that is the disclosure party, the UFO disclosure party, the Apollo disclosure party, the, JFK assassination disclosure party, and infiltrate that one and take that one over to, you know. So who knows what will happen in the future? We'll see.
I agree. What is your speaking of Apollyon as another name for Lucifer? What about that? And I'm not even sure I buy that it's really there, but I believe it's the 3-eye Apollo, or the Apollo 3-eye, that meteor that's coming through uh, in the heavens. NASA has spotted this, and they say it's acting much differently than any type of comet or anything like that.
It's not named Apollo. I think it just has some number A31 or something like
Uh,
that.
yeah,
And
yes. I'm trying to remember what it is. Yeah, it might not be.
you can't trust NASA,
Oh,
obviously.
Atlas. That
And
is it. Sorry, it's at 3-eye Atlas. My mistake. My mistake.
and Von Braun told his private secretary before he died that the federal government was planning on faking an alien invasion. So I also have a book about aliens. It's at Sibrel.com. It's an audio Kindle or print called Aliens from Planet X, about what aliens really are, based on my research of the top two UFO researchers, Jacques Vallée and Alan Hynek, concluded after 40 years of independent research that number one, UFOs are real. Number two, They're not from outer space, they're from Earth. And number three, they're demonic. So if they're going to fake an alien invasion, then they're going to create chatter about, maybe this is a UFO or whatever. Where are the congressional hearings about who shot JFK? There aren't any. Where are the congressional hearings about 9/11? There aren't any. Where are the congressional hearings about the moon landing being fake? There aren't any. So why are there congressional hearings about UFOs? Because they want us to believe in them, right? Leaking out this juicy information when in fact their demonic origin, and this is what my book goes into. I think it has 27 video clips or 29 video clips at Sibrel.com that back up where these aliens really are coming from and who they are and how they are part of the world hierarchy and how they might use a passing rogue planet in the future to claim they came from there as misdirection when in fact they've been here all along. So if the guy who faked the moon landing says they're going to fake an alien invasion, then you have to interpret it through those eyes. They want us to believe in UFOs for some reason.
I,
So,
I agree with you totally. Now, do you know who Gary Wayne is? He wrote the
no.
Genesis 6 conspiracy theory. I had him on recently, and we discussed actually not Three Eye Apollo, but Three Eye Atlas, and we were contemplating that maybe this is this false flag, that this is a big ship that is coming to observe us, and then it's going to move on, and then it will give us a certain amount of years to prepare for the return of these aliens. Because it's crazy that they're having this all throughout the news. It's on the news. It's NASA. They're tracking this. I'm like, if this was legit, this is so, like, you're trying to find a needle in the ocean, and they're like, oh yeah, we found this, and we have pictures of this. I'm thinking it's a bit of a psyop coming in already.
Oh, that reminds me. I'm going to make a quick note about this and invest, buy stock in signage companies, because what will happen is when you go to Walmart, there'll be English, there'll be Spanish, and then there'll be Martian. So there's going to be a big pull for all this new signage. Everything's going to exit. It's going to be in Martian too, and so invest in those companies.
A new translator to invest in Google Translate as well. When they start to roll out this Martian language, yeah, and you know, I had one of my earlier listeners actually um, confess to me that she believes that aliens are demonic. And at first, when I first started my show, I was like, I don't think so. I don't think so. And I am in that boat now where I'm like, I believe that they are. I really do. I believe that there is a fallen technology that is operating these, and that they are, um, yeah, that they are invading us from Earth itself. They're from here. They're from the planet. They might be interdimensional. They might be in a different dimension, but here on Earth, and
Yeah,
they're
that's what
praying.
my book talks about, and I came to the same conclusion that the Genesis 6, I'm sure you know, says that the fallen angels, against God's command, interbred with humans and created giants. It says that
Yeah,
literally.
yeah, the
It
Nephilim.
created a deformity. According to Leviticus, I think it's 19:19, God commands that species not be crossbred. Of course, people do it anyway. People commit every sin there is. And so this is where GMOs come from. God said not to make GMOs. And when you do it anyway, when you take a horse and you mate it with a donkey to get a mule, the mule is sterile. You see, a mule cannot breed with another mule. You have to always go back to the horse and the donkey. God built it into the DNA. If you violate it, it stops. So this is why, quote, aliens, fallen angels, are harvesting sperm and eggs when they do abductions. And why, when people invoke the name of Jesus, they flee. If they're from some galaxy far, far away, why would the name Rai, Bart, Buddha, Jesus, Mohammed, why would they care? Right? So that's why. And then you have this blood study done recently where this high school student went through the genealogy of, I think, 500,000 relatives of the presidents. And all of them are blood related except for one. And then Genesis 3:15, I think, says that God will put war between the seed, which is future offspring of Adam, us, and the seed of Lucifer, the seed of fallen angels. There will be a war. God's first commandment before sin entered the world was to be fruitful and multiply. And what do the evil Luciferian people who run the world want to do? The exact opposite. They want to lower the population. There's a great short film. It's in I have a podcast that I do once a week. And basically, they said you could fit the entire world population into the state of Texas and not be in high-rise cities. They would be in towns of about 50,000 each with parks. Everybody would have like half an acre land, and there'd be one park for every 100 homes or something like this, and have space left over. You see, so, and then why does the World Economic Forum have 666 in the logo, and Google 666, and CERN have 666?
Yeah, Google
There's a
Chrome.
war. There's a war between two bloodlines, right? And then there was a project about 20 years ago called the Eve Project, which was a bloodline study of DNA. And they took blood from every nationality, Eskimos, Africans, Swedes. They traced it backwards in time. They 100% concluded, science absolutely concluded, every human being that ever was, is, or ever will be came from one woman in Africa. No one before her, no evolution. She suddenly appeared. Scientific fact. So the atheists or Luciferian worshipers, who aren't actually atheists, who run the world say, okay, well, that's true, but we weren't made by God. We were made by aliens. I thought Ancient Aliens was a one-time, film. Apparently it's been going on for years. And they never ask in 3.5 years this simple question I would ask as a third grader. Okay, so if we're made by aliens, then who made the aliens? And they never ask this question, which is I think in Isaiah, it says that Lucifer wanted to dethrone God, to take over God's position. So if the show run by the Luciferian people who say the moon landings are real on the same channel, if we're made by aliens and aliens are really fallen angels whose leader is Lucifer, what they're really saying is mankind was made by Lucifer instead of God. That's actually what they're saying in Ancient Aliens. Pretty interesting, isn't it? And
Extremely.
then you have CERN trying to open a dimension. And the Bible talks about this in Revelation, a doorway being opened in the last days that allows demons to enter the earth. And their logo is 666 also, pretty interesting. And they have the opposite of what the Bible says. The Bible says mankind will crush Lucifer under his foot. But they have Shiva, the Indian god of Lucifer, putting mankind's head under its foot. Pretty interesting, huh? And then so go to Sibrel.com. It's a book called Aliens from Planet X. We also go into rogue planets, what they are, and how they are likely true, and how one likely came by the Earth at around 705 BC, because prior to that time, all the calendars of the world had a 360-day year. That's why there's 360 degrees on a compass. So think about this, Ryan. If every year is 360 days, that means every month is exactly 30 days. You have 12 months, 30 days each, exactly 12 tribes of Israel. How could you say there's no divine creation? In nature, that would be mathematical precision that would show that the universe and our solar system had intelligent design. But something happened. Planet Lucifer came by in 705 BC and pulled the Earth slightly further away from the sun, destroying the testimony of divine creation. Now it's 365 and a quarter. And I believe the planet may come by because in Isaiah, which is actually about the last days, I think it's chapter 13, verse 13, says the earth will be moved out of its place, pulled out of its orbit. You see? And if that dead world comes by, planet Lucifer, then aliens appear. They can claim, just like they lie and they say they claim come from this solar system, 300 million light years away. They'll claim they came from planet X and use the planet as their spaceship, and we can visit when we're near Earth. You see, it's very logical, but they're liars and they were here all along. So that's what my other book is about, Aliens from Planet X. It goes into the bloodline biblical background of aliens and into what rogue planets really are, how they are actually very common. And every solar system has 2 to 4 rogue planets in its neighborhood. And apparently ours is about 7 times bigger than the Earth. It came by in 705 BC and may very well come by again and cause greater global catastrophes than we've ever seen. And that's what Jesus says. There will be greater cataclysms in the last days than in the entire history of the world.
Wow. And we have undergone some major cataclysms as well. If we go back to the dinosaurs, the meteor impact in Chicxulub, allegedly, that took out the dinosaurs as well. So yeah, we're in for something great. Not great, unfortunately it's going to be a lot of destruction, but as long as we're following the one true God. And that's it. Like, if we're talking about Luciferians and whatnot, that's one thing I always say is when we're watching these TV shows or these award shows and the actor or the actress is, I want to thank God, we assume as individuals that, oh, it's the one true God. But they don't say that. They who are they thanking when they're up there? They're putting on a show for everyone to see, because I think the world is more of a stage than we're led to believe. We're in this, we're part of a show. We are the audience in a show that is going on, and it's continuously stuff is happening, being placed in front of our faces, to shock us and to put us into this fear state where we give everything away. Like the assassination that just happened recently, the more I'm starting to look into that, the more I have a lot more questions. There's a lot of questions that keep coming up. And as a critical thinker, you are thinking outside the box. I believe your podcast is Escaping the Box. I think, is that what your
Box
podcast?
Escape.
Yes, Box Escape, which I implore people to, think outside the box. Quit. You're throwing these images, whether they be positive, such as, oh yeah, we landed on the moon, and everybody gets so behind it, or these towers just collapsed, and there's so much dread and destruction. But we need to step back and start to look at these things as to why they're all happening. It's for the harvesting of our fear. It's for this control, so they can keep us in line and control us continuously. And as soon as we start to, I feel that as soon as we start to move forward from something, they throw something else at us and in our face. And it's this total control all the time. And I do believe that the Luciferians are in control, or at least they're
So
trying to be.
that's why Hebrews says it's the fear of death that keeps mankind in slavery. And the reason why that has become more successful over time is because people believe in God less and less. If you believe in God, there's no fear of death. Any religious leader who rides around in a truck behind bulletproof glass doesn't really believe in God, do they? Because they have fear of death. That's their false prophet right there by riding around behind bulletproof glass. You,
I
you
didn't
see
even
that?
consider that. I didn't even
And
consider
so,
that.
you see? And so we're going to die anyway. And because people don't believe in God anymore, no one is willing to die for what is right. So all these whistleblowers in the government that should be coming forward, they're not. They're afraid to lose their house. They're afraid to lose their income. They're afraid to lose their job. But history will record them as a coward, a soldier who should have stood up and made a winning decision in a battle. So many people could come forward about 9/11. There had to be NORAD and people like that involved in doing 9/11 and killing Kennedy And this last thing for the last 3 years and faking the moon, we had one person come forward who was the chief of security where they filmed the moon landing. And he said he even killed somebody personally to cover it up. I wanted to get right with a God before he died. So people need to see that they need to realize they're going to die anyway. I turned down the project for fear of death. Then I realized after I read the Bible that I'm going to die anyway. And the faking of the moon landing is a spiritual example of the fallen nature of mankind and America. And the only way that can be corrected is to tell the truth about it.
100%. And that's something I keep, like, I used to, I read the Bible many, many years ago. And the more I do this show, the more it's becoming apparent that we are in a spiritual battle, or like a spiritual battle. It's good versus evil. It's not man versus man. It's
That's
man
right.
versus the
Our
unseen.
struggle is not against flesh and blood. I mean, it's not against each other, especially half the world is divorced, right? So that's probably people's greatest enemy is their ex-spouse, but it's really not. Our battle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against the demonic forces of evil in the heavenly realms or other dimensions, which is what the top two UFO researchers said these entities are coming from, other dimensions. Now, I also have a second podcast called End Times Church. If you go to Sibrel.com, there's a button, Bart's Podcast. You can subscribe to Box Escape or End Times Church, which talks about news events as how they pertain to the end of the world.
Interesting. I think that's something we definitely need. I don't know if you ever have any guests on, but I highly recommend, like I said before, I was talking about Gary Wayne, who wrote the book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Theory. He is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to all of this. I just interviewed Vicky Joy Anderson as well, who talks about, it may not seem connected, but it completely is. She talks about sleep paralysis, and it's called They Come Out at Night. She wrote a book called They Only Come Out at Night, and it's about abduction and this spiritual battle that we are facing. And it's, and they talk about hybridization as well. I know you mentioned that, you kind of touched on that, but we never really went into that. Now, this hybridization, of course, is because you're saying that they can't reproduce. So they're taking our reproductive, the sperm and the eggs, and they're creating their own hybrids. Now, I don't want to keep you too much longer, Bart, but what is your theory on the hybrids? Why are they creating hybrids? I know it may be to prolong or increase their numbers, but is there another reason? I have a theory myself, but I'd love to hear your theory as to why they're creating the hybrids.
Well, I guess to just infiltrate humanity is the reason why. And if crossbreeding species causes sterility, that explains why fertility rates have dropped by 65% since GMOs were introduced. It's part of their plan. As technology increases, so should longevity and fertility, right?
Yes.
And yet, longevity rates are actually dropping and fertility rates are dramatically dropping as technology increases, which means both of those results are intentional. There's some group of people who run the world who are intentionally making people sterile and lowering the population. And I think they're outnumbered. They're doing this to reproduce. A Nephilim is sterile. A half human, half fallen angel is sterile. And that's why the quote alien abductions harvest sperm and eggs to continually reproduce and to infiltrate mankind, is be my guess.
Interesting. Yeah, I do agree with the infiltration, but I think it's actually something greater. I think it's a greater plan, almost, with this infiltration of these hybrids is
Yeah,
almost.
they could. I think, are you going to say they're trying to basically convert biologically humanity into them through these injections
Along
and things
that
like
line, but
that?
I actually
Yeah.
believe that they are looking for a back door back into heaven, to get back in so they can wage a war that way directly with heaven, not just on earth, but in the heavens as well. That if they can create a hybrid that they can put a soul in and it can be one of theirs, it's like a secret agent that they can maybe access through they can bypass through some way. Like it's just a thought that I've had about that. Is it right? It's just speculation. I think that's all
Yeah,
we're doing
I'm
here.
trying to think of what scripture could be Revelation 12:1, but it says there was war in heaven. We think of heaven as being peaceful and loving. That's where God and Jesus are, but it says there was war in heaven. Now, time may be sequential and permanent at the same time, in that sequentially the end days haven't happened yet, but if they're prophetically written, then they have already happened. So the war in heaven could have happened in the past, and it could, in a way, happen again in the future because it's kind of in another dimension. So it sounds like there already has been and perhaps will be again war in heaven. Of course, we know the outcome, that Jesus wins and Lucifer and his angels are cast down. And it says, woe to the earth, because the devil and his angel have been cast down to you, and they know their time is short, and they're taking it out on us. So, but if we're faithful to the end, we have to be converted and then stay converted, because Jesus says only those who hold to the end will be saved. The other people will gain the world and lose their soul, and so be it. They can have it, right?
I
They can
agree.
they can have their president and their fake moon landing and their 9/11, and congratulations on being so clever. I'm going
Yeah,
to live forever.
they can take all the injections they want as well, and they can do whatever they want. I'm out. Yeah.
So we'll see. And good talking to you, Rye. And
Yeah, Bart, this
I
has
hope.
been great. I really appreciate this conversation. And is there anything else you want to add to this before we call it quits here for tonight?
No, I appreciate you mentioning the podcast. I hardly ever mention that in the interviews I do, but I do a subscriber podcast called Box Escape and End Times Church. Go to Sibrel.com, and there's a button on there somewhere for Bart's podcast. Feel free to subscribe. It's only like about 40 people or so, but I do 2 every week, and I hope
That's
you
awesome.
enjoy them.
Of course, of course. Bart, thank you so much for making time. I really appreciated this. And, I wish you all the best in the future because you are bringing the truth to the people when we need it the most, is the bottom line, is we need this truth.
Yeah, it'd be amazing breakthrough if the truth comes out about the moon landing fraud. It could cause civil unrest.
Yes,
An NBC News director who agreed that the footage I uncovered proved the moon missions were fake was afraid to broadcast it for fear it would cause anarchy. So who knows what will happen if the truth comes out, but the truth needs to come out and we need to suffer the consequences to overcome.
exactly. Exactly. We need to work through those consequences. Perhaps it can heal us or make things worse.
Well, it would do both. When you pop a boil, it makes things worse, all the pus comes out. But then it also makes things better because there's healing and you have to get the pus out. And that's what the moon landing fraud is. You have to accept the fact that our government did something so wicked and murdered people to cover it up, and let's put it behind us and go forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bart, so much.
Sure. God bless.
You as well. Everyone, I want to thank Bart for coming out tonight. This was a fantastic conversation. We started with the truth of the moon landing, and then we moved on to the truth about the aliens. It's pretty strange that I've been talking about these last couple episodes, specifically with Vicky as well. We just need to be aware at all times, and if that truth does come out, Tony Merkel's presentation that he. Not his presentation, but Tony Merkel's podcast. He always says the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And it will. It'll piss off a lot of people, but it will set us free. And we need that more than ever. We need to, and we shouldn't focus on the victim part of it. I can't believe they did that to us. We should focus on the healing aspect. Like Vicky said, we used to focus on, look at this scar, I healed. Not, oh, I have a scar. I'm such a victim. We have to stop that. But first, we have to know the truth. We can't avoid the truth. We can't back away from the truth. We can't say, I don't want to talk about it. No, we need to talk about it. We have to quit avoiding all these things and move forward with it. So until the next time, everyone, keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.